Alien dignitaries sat in silent apprehension. Their focus was on the central figure, cloaked in ceremonial robes of shimmering crimson, a member of the High Council. Around him, a council of generals, alien tacticians, and bureaucrats deliberated on a single subject, a human. Commander Ronan, the human soldier, the counselor's voice echoed coldly, continues to be a thorn in our side. His latest victory on Drenker Prime has destabilized our control over the frontier systems. It is clear the Empire cannot afford his continued defiance. Whispers rippled through the chamber. A lean, insectoid general clicked his mandibles in frustration. These humans, he hissed, weak and undisciplined. How has this one managed to repel our forces repeatedly? We've crushed rebellions 100 times larger than the forces he commands. The counselor's eyes, slitted and reptilian, narrowed. Weak? No. Humans have always been underestimated by the Empire, but we forget their unpredictability, their ability to adapt under pressure. Commander Ronan is a soldier unlike any other. He survived assassinations, ambushes, and sabotage attempts that would have crippled any of our finest. A murmur of discontent spread. The Galactic Empire, spanning thousands of systems and ruled with iron-fisted control, was not accustomed to being thwarted, especially not by a lone human. How much of a threat can one man be? A brutish, horned alien spat from the far corner of the room. His voice was thick with disdain. His victories are flukes. Our assassins will soon end his story. The counselor silenced the room with a raised claw. They have tried, and they have failed. Across the galaxy, among distant colonies and war-torn worlds, the name Ronan was becoming legend. His victories were whispered among the oppressed and feared by the rulers. What the Empire did not understand was that Ronan was more than just a soldier. He was human, a species known for their sheer will to survive when faced with impossible odds. On a distant outpost planet, Commander Ronan sat in the mess hall, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of bitter brew. He stared into the dark liquid, his thoughts far from the current battlefront. His scarred face was stoic, but beneath it simmered an unspoken burden. Sir, the recon team has returned. A young lieutenant stood before him, hesitating as Ronan glanced up. Casualties? Ronan's voice was low, gruff. The weight of command pressed hard on him these days, heavier with each new battle. Minor injuries, no deaths. They encountered heavy resistance, but were able to push through. Ronan gave a curt nod, his mind already calculating the next move. He lived by routine, missions, reports, and battles. It kept him focused, kept the darkness at bay. But lately, thoughts of his upcoming wedding had crept in, bringing a strange feeling of hope that he hadn't allowed himself in years. His fiancée, Lydia, had been his anchor, while Ronan had fought in distant battles. She had kept him grounded with messages and holocalls that reminded him there was something worth fighting for beyond the bloodshed. Soon, they would be together. He had promised her that the next battle would be his last. But the galaxy had other plans. Back in the Imperial Palace, the counselor moved to the center of the room, his voice a hissed command. We cannot wait for chance or incompetence to eliminate Ronan. He must be dealt with swiftly, without error. A new team of assassins, the best we can muster, will be sent. And this time, they will target him at his most vulnerable. On the day of his wedding, the room shifted. Even the most arrogant of the alien generals paused. They had studied Ronan. His tactics were sharp, his instincts keener, but his devotion to his fiancée was known, perhaps his only true weakness. It is time, the counselor declared, to end the human threat once and for all. The night sky above Ronan's outpost was a deep, endless black, dotted with distant stars. He stood outside, staring upward, a rare moment of peace in his life. But even as the silence surrounded him, a shadow loomed over his thoughts, something cold and intangible. In the heart of the Empire, plans had been set into motion. Assassins were already preparing for their next strike. They would come for him soon. But Ronan was unaware, his focus still locked on the hope of a future beyond the war, a hope that would soon be shattered. The warm sunlight bathed the open garden, casting long shadows across the lush, green expanse where the ceremony was about to take place. Exotic flowers from distant worlds lined the pathway, their iridescent petals shifting colors as a gentle breeze passed through. Ronan stood at the end of the aisle, dressed not in his usual battle armor, but in a tailored black suit, his hardened features softened by the rare expression of joy on his face. Today was a day unlike any other. Today, he was marrying Lydia. He glanced over the small gathering of guests, trusted comrades, family, and a few diplomats who had come to witness the union. It was a modest affair, far from the battlefields that had shaped so much of his life. His fellow soldiers grinned at him from their seats, an unspoken understanding between them that today marked the beginning of a new chapter for their commander, one far from the bloodshed and chaos they had all known too well. And then the music changed. Ronan's heart skipped a beat. Lydia emerged, radiant in her flowing white gown, her smile brighter than any sun. Her brown hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her deep, steady gaze locked onto his. For the first time in years, Ronan felt the familiar tightness of his chest release, as though every burden he carried had melted away in her presence. This moment was real, a fragment of peace he had yearned for amid the storm of his life. As Lydia reached him, they exchanged a private look, one filled with promises of a future far from war. She took his hand, her fingers soft against his callous ones. The officiant began speaking, but the words were a blur to Ronan. All he could focus on was a woman standing before him, her presence steadying him in a way nothing else could. Just as they began to speak their vows, the sky overhead rippled unnaturally, a shimmer that no one but Ronan noticed. His military instincts flared to life, cutting through the haze of joy. His eyes flickered upward, scanning the clouds for any sign of danger. But nothing seemed out of place. Not yet. Lydia squeezed his hand, bringing his attention back to her. She whispered softly, "It's all right. You're safe now." He wanted to believe her. He wanted this moment to remain untouched. But a nagging sense of unease settled into his gut. For years, the Empire had hunted him, sending assassins to end his life. He had survived every attempt, but the stakes had never been this personal. The Empire knew about Lydia, about their wedding, and he knew better than to think they would let him walk away from their grasp so easily. As if on cue, the ground beneath them shuddered. A low hum, almost imperceptible, rose in the distance, followed by the unmistakable shriek of energy weapons charging. Panic spread like wildfire through the crowd. Ronan's heart sank. The joyous atmosphere shattered in an instant. He turned, scanning the horizon for the source of the disturbance. A flash of silver streaked through the sky. "Get down," he bellowed, pushing Lydia behind him. The wedding guests scattered, diving for cover as small, sleek alien crafts descended upon the garden. Before Ronan could reach for his hidden sidearm, the first assassin dropped into view, his black armor glinting under the sunlight. There were more, severe of them, moving with lethal precision. His mind snapped into combat mode, years of training taking over. Ronan rushed forward, slamming into the first assassin with a force that sent them both tumbling across the ground. In one swift motion, he disarmed the alien, crushing the attacker's windpipe with a quick, brutal strike. But the assassins were well coordinated. They weren't here for a long battle. They were here for a quick kill. His instincts screamed that they would aim for the most vulnerable point in his life. Lydia. Ronan's eyes widened as he saw another assassin slipping past the chaos, heading directly for her. Time slowed as he broke into a sprint, his voice a roar of desperation. "Lydia, get down!" She turned just in time to see the blade. It was too late. The assassin struck with deadly precision, the blade sinking into her side. She gasped, her eyes wide with shock, her hands reaching out as if to grasp something that wasn't there. Ronan's world collapsed in an instant. "No!" he howled, reaching her just as the assassin pulled the blade free and fled. Ronan dropped to his knees, cradling Lydia as she slumped into his arms. Her gown, once pristine, was now stained with blood. His hands, shaking, pressed against the wound, but it was too deep, too final. Lydia's breath was shallow, her eyes struggling to focus on him. "Ronan," she whispered, her voice weak but still filled with the warmth she always gave him. "I'm sorry." Tears blurred his vision. "Don't. Stay with me. Please." But her eyes slowly closed, her body going limp in his arms. The love of his life, the one person who had given him hope for a peaceful future, was gone. Ronan sat in stunned silence as the chaos around him dimmed. His world had been ripped apart, and in its place, only one thing remained: revenge. The silence in the small, dimly lit room was suffocating. Ronan sat alone, the weight of his grief pressing down on him, transforming his once steely resolve into a smoldering thirst for vengeance. Lydia's death had shattered something deep inside him. He had loved her with all the humanity he had left, and now that part of him was gone. But the Empire hadn't anticipated the kind of enemy they'd made. He had spent weeks in isolation after the wedding attack, recovering physically but unable to escape the gnawing pain in his chest. His comrades had reached out, offering words of support, but none of it touched him. What he needed wasn't comfort. He needed retribution. And to achieve that, he would need a team as skilled and relentless as he was. It was in a dingy cantina on a forgotten mining colony where Ronan made his first move. The place reeked of oil, metal, and desperation. Alien miners and mercenaries filled the room, the sort of crowd that lived on the fringes of the galaxy, far from the prying eyes of the Empire. At a back table, a lone figure sat with a hood pulled low over her face, her eyes scanning the crowd with predatory sharpness. "Vanessa," Ronan said as he approached. The woman raised her gaze, her pale eyes flickering with recognition. A deadly smuggler and infiltrator. Vanessa had once worked alongside Ronan in a campaign against a rebel uprising on the edge of Empire space. They'd parted ways after the mission, but he knew she'd be the first to understand what he had in mind. "Ronan," she said, leaning back with a smirk. "Didn't think I'd see you again. You look worse for wear." He slid into the seat opposite her. "I need your help." Her smile faded. "The wedding." Ronan nodded, his jaw tight. "The Empire did this. I'm going to make them pay." Vanessa studied him for a moment, her calculating mind already at work. "You're serious. Dead serious." She leaned forward. "Then I'm in. But you're going to need more than me. Taking on the Empire isn't a one-person job, and we both know it." The next recruit was a hulking alien known only as Zarnak, a former soldier in the Empire's elite forces who had defected after they betrayed his people. Standing over 7 feet tall, his forearms rippled with muscle and his skin shimmered with a dark, metallic hue. He had been a warrior all his life, but after escaping the Empire, he had become a mercenary, one who despised the Empire with every fiber of his being. Ronan found him in a combat arena, the crowd roaring as Zarnak demolished his opponent with brute force. After the match, Ronan approached him in the back corridors of the arena, the stench of blood and sweat hanging in the air. "Zarnak," Ronan called, his voice cutting through the noise. The massive alien turned, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the human. "Commander Ronan," Zarnak rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "What brings you to this pit?" "I need warriors. The kind who aren't afraid to take the fight to the Empire's doorstep." Zarnak's mouth twisted into something resembling a smile. "I've waited years for this moment. Tell me when and where, and I will tear them apart." Next, Ronan sought out Kevin, a former Imperial hacker turned rogue. Kevin was a fantastic figure, always on the move, operating from the shadows of the galaxy's underworld. He was known for being able to slice into any system, no matter how heavily guarded. If Ronan was going to strike at the heart of the Empire, he'd need someone who could disable their defenses and access their deepest secrets. Ronan tracked Kevin down in an abandoned outpost on a derelict moon, surrounded by outdated consoles and flickering screens. The hacker looked up from his work as Ronan entered. "You're risking a lot coming here. Kevin said without turning, his fingers still flying over the keys. Empire's got eyes everywhere. Then it's a good thing I'm planning to blind them, Ronan replied, stepping closer. I need you to hack into the Imperial systems. We're going after the Emperor himself. Kevin paused, then slowly swiveled his chair around to face Ronan. His dark, sunken eyes gleamed with interest. You're going after the Emperor? Now that's a job worth doing. The final recruit was Naomi, a sharpshooting sniper from the icy world of Vardes. She had once been a decorated Imperial officer, but had defected after witnessing the brutal oppression of her people. Her precision in combat was legendary, and her loyalty to those she fought beside was unwavering. Ronan needed her skill set if his team was to stand a chance against the Emperor's personal guard. One shot, Naomi said simply when Ronan found her on the frozen plains of Vardes. She held her sniper rifle with the kind of ease that only years of training could provide. That's all I'll need to bring the Emperor down. With the team assembled, Ronan's plan was set into motion. They would strike at the Empire's most vulnerable point, its leader. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was a rebellion. Each of them had a reason to fight, a personal vendetta against the Empire that bound them together. As Ronan stood before his newly formed squad, the gravity of their mission sank in. Failure wasn't an option. The Empire would come to regret ever crossing him. We take down the Emperor, Ronan said, his voice cold and steady, and we make sure the galaxy never forgets it. The stars streaked past as Ronan's ship hurtled toward the heart of the Empire. He stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the distant glow of the Imperial capital. His team, Vanessa, Zarnak, Kevin, and Naomi, stood ready, each preparing for the battle to come in their own way. They knew this mission was a one-way trip. If they succeeded, they would deal a blow to the Empire unlike any before. If they failed, they would be nothing more than martyrs. Ronan clenched his fists, the memory of Lydia's death burning in his mind like a fire that could only be quenched with blood. The Emperor would die for what he had done. Ronan had sworn it. The plan was simple, yet daring. Infiltrate the Emperor's palace, breach its defenses, and assassinate the Emperor. Kevin had already disabled key security systems, allowing their ship to slip past the outer defenses. But inside the palace, they would be on their own, facing the Emperor's elite guard. Approaching drop zone, Vanessa said from the co-pilot seat, her voice steady. Ronan glanced over his shoulder. Ready? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Always, Zarnak rumbled, cracking his four knuckles as he checked his heavy plasma cannons. Naomi silently loaded her sniper rifle, her cold eyes betraying no emotion. She was ready to kill, her focus as sharp as the edge of her blade. Kevin finished his final security override and gave a nod. We'll have a narrow window before they realize we're inside. Let's make it count. The ship touched down silently on the outskirts of the Imperial Palace, a sprawling fortress of polished black stone and towering spires. The air was thick with tension as Ronan led the team into the shadows of the palace grounds. They moved like ghosts, slipping past guards and automated turrets, using Kevin's hacked pathways to avoid detection. The inner sanctum of the palace was eerily quiet, the weight of the Emperor's power palpable in the air. They reached a grand hallway, its walls lined with banners of the Empire, and Ronan motioned for the team to stop. Zarnak, take point. Naomi, find a vantage point and cover us. Kevin, disable the next level of security. Vanessa, you're with me. His voice was low, controlled. This was it. The final push. Zarnak stormed ahead, his massive frame crashing through the doors to the Emperor's private chamber with a thunderous roar. Inside, a squad of Imperial guards turned in shock, barely managing to raise their weapons before Zarnak mowed them down with a barrage of plasma fire. Naomi, positioned high in the rafters, picked off stragglers with precision shots, her rifle quiet but deadly. As Ronan and Vanessa pressed forward, the Emperor's throne room came into view. It was an immense space, lit with an eerie blue glow, the walls adorned with holographic images of the Empire's conquests. And at the far end, seated upon a towering obsidian throne, was the Emperor himself. The Emperor stood, his eyes gleaming with cold arrogance as he regarded Ronan and his team. Clad in regal armor that shimmered like liquid metal, he seemed unshaken by the intrusion. "You dare come to my throne room," the Emperor's voice echoed, deep and commanding. "Fools! You will die like all the others who have tried." Ronan stepped forward, his eyes locked on the Emperor. "You murdered my wife," he growled. "And now, I'm here to return the favor." The Emperor smirked. "I remember her well. She died beautifully." Ronan's rage exploded and he charged. But the Emperor raised a hand and a wave of energy blasted him backward, sending him crashing into the marble floor. Before Ronan could recover, the Emperor drew a long, crackling blade of pure energy, stepping down from his throne to face him. "You are nothing, Ronan, a mere insect beneath my heel." But Ronan wasn't alone. Vanessa leapt into action, her dual blades clashing with the Emperor's energy sword. The two locked in a deadly dance of speed and precision. Zarnak barreled into the room, his cannons blazing as he ripped through the last of the Emperor's guards. Kevin was in the corner, working furiously to override the palace's energy shields. Ronan rose to his feet, bloody but determined. As the Emperor focused on Vanessa's attacks, Ronan saw his opening. He lunged forward, tackling the Emperor with the full force of his body, knocking the blade from his hand. They rolled across the floor, fists and elbows striking like hammers. The Emperor snarled, his strength unnatural, but Ronan fought with something far stronger, his fury, his loss, his need for justice. Naomi, from her high vantage point, had the Emperor in her sights. The entire room had descended into chaos, but she waited for the perfect moment. Her finger hovered over the trigger, her breathing slow and measured. Ronan and the Emperor struggled below. But then the Emperor made a critical mistake. He exposed his chest for just a second. Naomi pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through the air with lethal precision, striking the Emperor squarely in the heart. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock, before collapsing to the ground, his life draining away in a pool of his own blood. Ronan stood over the Emperor's body, breathing heavily, his face a mix of triumph and devastation. It was done. The Emperor was dead. The Empire would crumble without its leader. But as Ronan looked down at the lifeless form of the man who had taken everything from him, there was no joy, no satisfaction. Only the hollow realization that nothing would bring Lydia back. "Let's get out of here," Ronan said quietly, his voice strained. His team nodded, and together they left the palace, the echoes of their victory trailing behind them.